know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The rhythmic beeping pierced through the darkness first. Steady, mechanical, persistent. Then came the antiseptic smell, sharp and clinical, cutting through the fog in Thomas Sullivan's mind. His eyelids felt as heavy as concrete slabs, but somehow he managed to force them open, squinting against the harsh fluorescent light that flooded his vision. White. Everything was white. The ceiling tiles above him came into focus slowly, their sterile uniformity broken only by the regular pattern of tiny holes. Room 407 at Memorial General Hospital, though he wouldn't learn this detail until later. A shadow moved at the edge of his vision. The soft squeak of rubber soles on linoleum preceded the appearance of a woman in a white coat, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Dr. Olivia Martinez adjusted her stance as she noticed his open eyes, her clipboard lowering slightly as she leaned forward to study his face. "Mr. Sullivan?" Her voice was gentle but clear, professional yet carrying an undercurrent of genuine concern. "Can you hear me?" Thomas tried to respond, but his throat felt like sandpaper. His tongue seemed too large for his mouth, uncooperative and foreign. A weak grunt was all he could manage. "Don't try to speak just yet," Dr. Martinez advised, reaching for a small cup of iced chips on the nearby table. "Here, let these melt in your mouth. Take it slow." The cool moisture was heaven against his parched throat. Thomas let the ice dissolve, each drop of water bringing him further back to full consciousness. As his awareness expanded, he became cognizant of more sensations. The stiffness in his joints, the weight of the blanket across his legs, the pinch of an four in his arm. "Welcome back, Mr. Sullivan," Dr. Martinez said, checking the monitors beside his bed. Her dark eyes moved methodically from screen to screen, making notes on her clipboard. "You've been in a coma for almost 8 months. The words hit him like a physical blow. 8 months. The ice chip in his mouth suddenly felt like a stone. His last memory flickered through his mind. Windshield wipers fighting against the October rain, headlights reflecting off wet asphalt, classic rock playing softly on the car radio as he drove home from work. Then, nothing. 8. He managed to croak out, his voice rough from disuse. "Yes, since October 15th, Dr. Martinez confirmed, her tone gentle but matter-of-fact. "Today is June 8th. You've been under our care here at Memorial General the entire time." Thomas's eyes darted around the room, searching. The chair beside his bed was occupied, but not by who he expected. Instead of his wife Grace's familiar figure, he saw Robert, Bobby Walsh, his colleague from the engineering firm. Bobby's usually cheerful face was drawn with concern, his tie loosened and suit jacket draped over the back of the chair. "Hey, buddy," Bobby said, attempting a smile. "Good to see those eyes open." Something felt off about Bobby's presence, but Thomas couldn't quite place what it was. Why wasn't Grace here? Where were Ryan and Madeline, his children? The questions tried to form on his tongue, but his throat wouldn't cooperate. "Your wife was here earlier," Dr. Martinez said, as if reading his thoughts. "She's been here almost every day. We sent her home to rest a few hours ago. She'll be thrilled to know you're awake." Bobby shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fingers drumming an irregular pattern on his knee. "Yeah, Grace has been really dedicated. Barely left your side these past months." There was something in Bobby's tone, a slight hesitation that Thomas's foggy brain couldn't quite process. Before he could dwell on it, Dr. Martinez began her examination, checking his pupils with a penlight and testing his reflexes. "Can you squeeze my fingers?" she asked, placing her hand in his. Thomas concentrated, managing a weak grip. "Good. Now the other hand." "Excellent. You're showing promising responses, Mr. Sullivan." A nurse entered the room, her pink scrubs adding a burst of color to the monochromatic environment. She smiled warmly when she saw Thomas was awake. "Well, look who's decided to join us. I'm Nurse Reynolds, but everyone calls me Patty. I've been taking care of you during my shifts." As Patty checked his vital signs and adjusted his four, Thomas tried to piece together what had happened. October 15th. He remembered leaving work late, staying behind to finish reviewing structural plans for the new City Hall project. The rain had been heavy, unusually so for October. But what had happened after that? Do you remember anything about the accident, Mr. Sullivan? Dr. Martinez asked, watching his face carefully. Thomas tried to shake his head, but the movement sent a wave of dizziness through him. No, he managed to whisper. That's completely normal, she assured him. Memory loss around traumatic events is very common. The important thing is that you're awake now, and your initial responses are very encouraging. Bobby stood up, smoothing down his rumpled shirt. I should call Grace. Let her know the good news. He paused, then added, and I'll let the office know too. Everyone's been worried sick, Tom. As Bobby stepped out into the hallway, phone in hand, Thomas caught a glimpse of his face. There was something there, something in his old friend's expression that sent a faint warning signal through his mind. But the thought slipped away as Dr. Martinez continued her examination. Mr. Sullivan, I'm going to ask you a few questions to assess your cognitive function. Don't worry if you can't answer all of them right away. Just do your best. She pulled a pen from her pocket. Can you tell me your full name? Thomas. James Sullivan, he whispered, each word a struggle. Good. And your birth date? March 3rd, 1982. Excellent. Do you know where you live? 423 Pine Grove Drive. Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly, making notes on her clipboard. Your long-term memory appears intact, which is a very good sign. Now, I want you to listen carefully. You're going to need extensive physical therapy to regain your strength. 8 months of inactivity has taken a toll on your muscles. It's going to be challenging, but based on your initial responses, I'm optimistic about your recovery. Nurse Patty finished adjusting his four and checked the monitors one final time. Would you like me to help you sit up a bit? Just a little at first. Thomas nodded slightly, and Patty used the bed's controls to raise the head slightly. The change in position made him dizzy for a moment, but as the sensation passed, he could see more of the room. Cards and flowers decorated the windowsill, though many of the flowers were clearly fresh, recently replaced. A few children's drawings were taped to the wall. He recognized Madeline's artistic style in one of them, a colorful rainbow over what appeared to be the hospital. Bobby returned, slipping his phone into his pocket. Grace is on her way, he announced, though his tone seemed strangely tense. She was very excited to hear the news. Dr. Martinez made a few final notes on her clipboard. I'll be back to check on you in a few hours, Mr. Sullivan. Try to rest, and don't try to push yourself too hard just yet. Nurse Reynolds will be here if you need anything. As the doctor left the room, Thomas tried to process everything. 8 months of his life, gone in what felt to him like the blink of an eye. His children would be different now. Ryan would be 14, Madeline 12. He'd missed Christmas, their birthdays, all the daily moments of their lives. The thought made his chest tight. Bobby resumed his seat, his usual easygoing manner seemingly strained. Listen, Tom, I know this must be overwhelming, but you should know. Things have changed a bit while you were away. Before Bobby could elaborate, rapid footsteps in the hallway announced a new arrival. Thomas turned his head slowly toward the door, expecting to see Grace. Instead, he saw a tall man in a business suit hurrying past, carrying what looked like a medical file. The man glanced into the room as he passed, and for a brief moment, his eyes met Thomas's. Something about that gaze made Thomas's skin crawl, though he couldn't explain why. Who was that? He managed to ask Bobby. His colleague's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Oh, probably just one of the doctors. Place is full of them, you know. But Thomas didn't miss the way Bobby's eyes followed the man's passage, or the slight tremor in his friend's hands as he reached for his coffee cup. Something was wrong here, very wrong. But in his weakened state, with his mind still foggy from months of unconsciousness, he couldn't quite grasp what it was. The monitors continued their steady beeping, marking time in this strange new reality he'd awakened to. As Thomas waited for his wife to arrive and tried to ignore the growing sense of unease in his gut, the days following Thomas's awakening blurred together in a haze of medical tests, preliminary therapy sessions, and strange, tense family visits. As his strength slowly returned, so did his ability to notice the discrepancies in his new reality. 3 weeks after opening his eyes, the physical therapy room buzzed with quiet activity, the soft whir of exercise equipment mixing with murmured conversations and occasional grunts of effort. 3 weeks had passed since Thomas Sullivan had opened his eyes in room 407, and while his body was slowly regaining strength, his mind was increasingly troubled by the discordant notes in what should have been a simple recovery story. Nathan Crawford, his physical therapist, stood nearby as Thomas gripped the parallel bars, his arms trembling with the effort of supporting his weight. "That's it, Mr. Sullivan," Nathan encouraged, his muscular frame ready to catch Thomas if needed. "Just a few more steps." Sweat beaded on Thomas's forehead as he forced his legs to move. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to flicker mockingly, reminiscent of the strange glances he'd been noticing between Nathan and Grace during these sessions. There it was again, that knowing look the therapist gave his wife as she watched from her usual chair by the window. "You're doing great, honey," Grace called out, her voice carrying that odd note Thomas had been hearing more frequently. Was it strain? Guilt? After 20 years of marriage, he should have been able to read her perfectly, but lately, she seemed like a stranger wearing his wife's face. Thomas's legs buckled slightly, and Nathan's strong hands immediately steadied him. "Careful there," the therapist said, his grip lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Remember what we discussed about pacing yourself?" Grace's phone buzzed, and she quickly checked it, her perfectly manicured fingers moving swiftly over the screen. A slight frown crossed her face before she schooled her features back into a neutral expression. Thomas had noticed she was getting a lot of messages lately, always turning her phone away when he was near. "Everything okay?" Thomas asked, his voice stronger now, but still carrying the rasp of disuse. "Oh, just work stuff," Grace replied, too quickly. "The foundation is planning another fundraiser." The Sullivan Family Foundation, Grace's pet project for the past 5 years. She'd thrown herself into charitable work after cutting back her hours at the law firm, focusing particularly on medical causes. Now, looking back, Thomas wondered if there had been more to that career change than she'd let on. The door to the therapy room opened, and Ryan and Madeline entered with their Aunt Catherine. Thomas's children moved differently now, more hesitant around him. As if he were a stranger they were still learning to trust. Ryan, at 14, seemed to have aged years rather than months, his lanky frame carrying a new tension. 12-year-old Madeline's eyes held shadows that hadn't been there before, her once boundless energy now carefully contained. "Dad," Madeline called out, but there was a slight delay before the word, as if she had to remind herself to say it. She clutched a new drawing in her hands, her knuckles white against the paper. Catherine guided them to chairs near Grace, her sister-in-law's presence causing a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. Thomas had always been close to his sister, but lately, her visits carried an undercurrent of something. Anxiety? Fear? The emotions flitted across her face too quickly to read. "Look what Maddie drew in art therapy today," Catherine said, her voice too bright, too forced. Art therapy. Another change Thomas was still trying to understand. Why did his children need therapy? Grace had mentioned something about helping them cope with his accident, but the explanation felt incomplete. Madeline held up her drawing, a family portrait, but something about it caught Thomas's attention. In the picture, the figure representing him was separated from the others by a thick, black line, while another male figure stood close to Grace and the children. Before he could get a better look, Grace quickly took the drawing and folded it away. "That's lovely, sweetie," Grace said, shooting a warning glance at Catherine. "Why don't you tell Dad about school instead?" Ryan slouched deeper in his chair, his eyes fixed on his phone. "School's fine," he muttered. "Richard's helping me with my science project." Richard. The name hit Thomas like a physical blow. Richard Hawthorne, his former best friend from their Marine days. Grace had mentioned he'd been supporting the family during Thomas's coma, but the frequency of his name in conversation seemed to be increasing rather than decreasing now that Thomas was awake. "Richard's been such a blessing," Grace added, that strange note back in her voice. "He's really stepped up to help with the kids while you were away." Nathan's hands tightened slightly on Thomas's shoulders. "Let's take a break," the therapist suggested, helping Thomas to a nearby chair. "You've pushed hard enough for today." As Thomas sat, trying to catch his breath, Nurse Patty Reynolds entered with his afternoon medications. The older nurse had become something of a constant in his new reality, her cheerful demeanor occasionally cracking to reveal glimpses of Concern? Sympathy? Today, she seemed distracted as she checked his vital signs. Your blood pressure's a bit high, Patty noted, frowning at the reading. Have you been feeling stressed? Before Thomas could respond, Grace interrupted. He's just been working hard in therapy. Right, Nathan? The therapist nodded, but Thomas caught another of those loaded glances between them. He'd been noticing more and more of these silent exchanges, between Grace and Nathan, between Catherine and the doctors, between the hospital staff themselves when they thought he wasn't watching. Your wife's friend Richard sure has been supportive through all this, Patty said suddenly, then immediately looked like she wanted to take back her words. The room seemed to freeze for a moment, tension crackling in the air. Richard. The name triggered something in Thomas's mind, a fragment of memory trying to surface. Richard Hawthorne. Not just his former best friend, but his brother in arms. They'd served together in the Marines, saved each other's lives more than once. But there was something else, something about Richard that was trying to push through the fog in his mind. Yes, Richard's been wonderful, Grace said quickly, standing up. Kids, we should go. Dad needs his rest, and you have homework. As his family gathered their things, Thomas watched them with new eyes. Ryan's reluctance to meet his gaze, Madeline's nervous glances at her mother, Catherine's barely concealed anxiety. All pieces of a puzzle he was slowly beginning to assemble. Same time tomorrow, Mr. Sullivan? Nathan asked, his professional manner firmly back in place. Thomas nodded, his mind already working through the implications of everything he'd observed. Looking forward to it, he lied, noting how Grace's hand trembled slightly as she gathered her designer purse. After they left, Patty lingered, adjusting his four with unusual concentration. Mr. Sullivan, she said finally, her voice low, sometimes things aren't what they seem. Sometimes people we trust. She trailed off, glancing toward the door. What are you trying to tell me, Patty? Thomas asked, but the nurse just shook her head. Just keep your eyes open, she whispered, then hurried from the room, leaving Thomas alone with his growing suspicions. That evening, back in room 407, Thomas lay awake long after visiting hours, his mind racing. The constant beeping of monitors provided a soundtrack to his thoughts as he pieced together the inconsistencies in Grace's stories about his accident, the way she never quite gave the same version twice. The mysterious Dr. Berkeley who had been abruptly replaced by Dr. Martinez on his case. The mounting inconsistencies nagged at him like a splinter under his skin. Grace's changing stories about the accident. Richard's constant presence in his family's life. His children's strange behavior. The knowing looks between hospital staff. Each detail was a thread in a tapestry of deception he was only beginning to glimpse. The morning of Thomas's scheduled discharge dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the windows of room 407 as he prepared to leave the hospital that had been his home for the past 8 months. His duffel bag lay open on the bed, filled with the personal items that had accumulated during his stay. Cards, photos, a few books he didn't remember anyone bringing. As he reached for his watch on the bedside table, his hand brushed against something unexpected in the small locker beside his bed. A USB drive, unremarkable and black, had been tucked into the corner of the drawer. A drawer that should have been emptied and cleaned multiple times during his stay according to hospital protocol. The fact that it was there now, on this specific day, couldn't be a coincidence. Thomas glanced at the door before picking it up, turning it over in his hand. A small piece of tape on one side bore a single word in precise military handwriting. Watch. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his laptop, another item he didn't remember anyone bringing to his room. The USB drive felt heavy with possibility as he plugged it in, its contents loading with agonizing slowness. A single video file appeared on the screen. The timestamp showed it had been recorded 3 months ago. Thomas clicked play, and the face of Jack Winters filled his screen. His former Marine intelligence officer looked older, more weathered, but his eyes still held the same sharp intensity Thomas remembered from their service days. Sullivan, Jack's recorded voice was low and urgent. If you're watching this, you've finally woken up. And if I manage to get this to you, things are worse than we thought. What I'm about to show you. Hell, I almost didn't believe it myself. The video shifted to surveillance footage. Thomas's breath caught in his throat as he recognized Grace and Richard, standing in what appeared to be a hospital conference room. They were talking to a man in a white coat, Dr. Alan Berkeley, the neurologist who had mysteriously vanished from his case. The footage had no audio, but the body language spoke volumes. Grace's animated gestures, Richard's predatory smile, Dr. Berkeley's calculating nods. A soft knock at the door made Thomas quickly close the laptop. Nurse Patty entered, carrying his final discharge papers. Her eyes flickered to the laptop, then back to his face. "Almost ready to go home, Mr. Sullivan?" "Almost," Thomas replied, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd just seen. "Patty, who had access to my personal locker?" The nurse's expression shifted subtly. "Hospital policy is that only patients and authorized staff can access personal storage." "But," she hesitated, lowering her voice, "there were times when certain people seemed to have access they shouldn't have." Before Thomas could press further, Grace arrived with Richard in tow. The sight of his former best friend made Thomas's blood run cold. Richard's familiar grin felt like a mask now, his friendly clap on Thomas's shoulder carrying an undercurrent of threat. "Ready to go home, buddy?" Richard's voice was jovial, but his eyes were calculating. "Grace thought I should help get you settled in." "That's thoughtful of you," Thomas replied carefully, watching their reflections in the window. He didn't miss the quick glance Richard and Grace exchanged. The drive home was tense with unspoken words. Grace chatted nervously about nothing: the changes to the garden, Ryan's baseball games, Madeline's art classes. Richard drove, occasionally catching Thomas's eye in the rearview mirror. Each glance felt like a challenge. They pulled into the driveway of 423 Pine Grove Drive, and Thomas felt a surge of disconnection. The house looked the same but felt different, as if it had shifted slightly out of alignment with his memories. The children's bikes were missing from the front yard. Richard's car was parked in what had always been Thomas's spot. Inside, the changes were more apparent. Small details jumped out at him: new furniture arrangements, different photos on the walls, subtle shifts in the atmosphere of what should have been his sanctuary. Richard moved through the space with the ease of familiarity, heading straight to the kitchen to grab some drinks. Grace followed Thomas into the kitchen, her heels clicking on the tile floor. Something in her stance, in the way she positioned herself between Thomas and the knife block, told him she knew. She knew that he knew. "How long have you been planning this?" Thomas asked quietly, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. Grace's mask cracked, just for a moment, revealing something ugly beneath. "Planning what, dear? Your homecoming? We've all been so looking forward to it." "Cut the act, Grace." Thomas turned to face her fully. "The video footage. Dr. Berkeley. The convenient accident that put me in a coma. How long?" The sound of a glass shattering made them both jump. Richard stood in the doorway, broken glass at his feet, his face twisted with fury and fear. "You weren't supposed to find out," Grace spat, her beautiful face contorting with malice. "Not yet. Not until everything was in place. Remember your coma?" she continued, her voice rising. "It was us. Richard and I needed you out of the way. Your precious kids? They love him more than you now. Those tears everyone shed? We were laughing the moment we left your room. We even had parties there while you were unconscious." Her laugh was brittle, hysterical. "You can't prove anything. We got everyone with us." Thomas stood very still, absorbing every word, every gesture. His military training kicked in, assessing threats and exits. Richard's stance had shifted to combat ready, his hand drifting toward his back waistband. Grace's manicured nails drummed against the kitchen counter, inches from the knife block. "Everyone?" Thomas asked quietly. "Dr. Martinez? Nurse Reynolds? The staff who helped you throw your little parties?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Grace's face. "They don't matter. Nobody will believe you. You're just a confused coma patient, probably suffering from trauma-induced delusions." "Right, Richard." Richard stepped forward, glass crunching under his shoes. "Right. Who would believe you over us? A respected charity founder and a decorated veteran? Face it, Tom. You've lost. Your life, your family. They're ours now." Thomas thought of the USB drive still in his laptop bag, of Jack Winters and his intelligence network, of the surveillance footage that proved everything. But he kept his expression neutral, years of military training helping him maintain control. Maybe you're right, he said carefully, noting how Grace's shoulders relaxed slightly. Maybe I am confused. 8 months is a long time to be gone. Exactly, Grace purred, her confidence returning. Now, why don't you go rest? The guest room is all made up for you. The guest room? In his own house. Thomas nodded slowly, picking up his bag. As he left the kitchen, he heard Richard murmur something to Grace, followed by her sharp, triumphant laugh. Upstairs, in what had once been his bedroom, Thomas could hear them moving around below, probably congratulating themselves on containing the situation. He pulled out his phone. A new one Jack had apparently arranged to be waiting for him, and sent a single text message. They confessed. All of it. It's done, came the reply. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, his hands steady despite everything. In the kitchen below, he could hear Grace's laughter mixing with Richard's voice, the sounds of his old life twisted into something unrecognizable. The truth was out now. There was no going back. The morning after Grace's confession, Thomas sat in a dimly lit corner booth of the Riverside Diner, his hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee. The early morning crowd was sparse. A few truckers, some hospital staff ending their night shifts, and a waitress who kept the coffee flowing without asking questions. Perfect for what he needed to do. His phone lay on the table, display showing the secured messaging app Jack had somehow managed to install remotely. The last message glowed on the screen. 0600. Riverside Diner. Back booth. Come alone. At exactly 6, a shadow fell across the table. Jack Winters hadn't changed much since their Marine days, still ramrod straight, still that calculating look in his steel-gray eyes. Only the touches of silver at his temples betrayed the passage of time. He slid into the booth without a word, surveying the diner with the practiced ease of someone who never quite left the battlefield behind. You look like hell, Sullivan, Jack said finally, signaling the waitress for coffee. 8 months in a coma will do that to you, Thomas replied dryly. Thanks for the USB drive. Jack's expression hardened. Wasn't easy getting it to you. Your room was watched more carefully than you'd expect for a coma patient. Had to call in some favors with the janitorial staff. The waitress arrived with Jack's coffee and a fresh pot for Thomas. They waited until she was out of earshot before continuing. Tell me everything, Thomas said, leaning forward. How long have you been watching? Jack took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving Thomas's face. Started about 4 months ago. One of my security firm's clients, hospital board member, noticed some irregularities in the billing department. Asked me to look into it quietly. He pulled out a thin tablet, sliding it across the table. What I found was bigger than just creative accounting. Thomas activated the tablet, his engineer's mind automatically cataloging the details that appeared on the screen. Financial records, medical charts, surveillance photos, all pointing to something far more sinister than a cheating wife. Dr. Alan Berkeley, Jack continued, pulling up a personnel file. Harvard Medical, top of his class, brilliant neurologist with a God complex. Been running experiments on inducing controlled comas in patients. Insurance companies pay out big for long-term care, and Berkeley found a way to tap into that revenue stream. Thomas's hands tightened around his coffee cup. And Grace? Richard? Berkeley needed subjects. Healthy ones, with good insurance and family members willing to play along. Jack's voice was carefully neutral. Your wife approached him, not the other way around. She and Richard had been planning things for a while. Berkeley's scheme just gave them the perfect opportunity. The coffee turned to acid in Thomas's stomach. How many others? That's where it gets interesting. Jack pulled up another file. You weren't the first, but you might have been the last. A detective, Andrea Reeves from the fraud division, has been building a case against Berkeley for months. She's good, former military intelligence herself. Would have caught them eventually, but they were careful. Compartmentalized. Each family member involved only knew their part. As if on cue, the diner's door chimed. A woman in her late 40s entered, her practical pantsuit and sensible shoes marking her as law enforcement even without the badge clipped to her belt. Detective Andrea Reeves moved through the diner with quiet authority, sliding into their booth without invitation. Mr. Sullivan, she said, her voice carrying a hint of Boston in its no-nonsense tone. Good to finally meet you while you're conscious. Thomas raised an eyebrow at Jack, who shrugged. Andrea's been keeping tabs on your case since before you woke up. She's the one who flagged the irregularities in Berkeley's patient records. 7 patients in the past 2 years, Andrea said, pulling out her own tablet. All healthy, all with excellent insurance coverage, all diagnosed with unexplained comas. 5 recovered within 6 to 8 months. 1 died, complications they called it. And then there's you. She spread digital photos across her tablet screen. Other families, other victims. Thomas recognized the same patterns. Wealthy professionals, seemingly devoted spouses, perfect lives that weren't what they seemed. The problem, Andrea continued, is proving it. Berkeley's smart. The medical procedures look legitimate on paper. The families all stick to their stories. Bank transfers are laundered through the hospital's charitable foundation. Grace's foundation, Thomas interjected, the pieces clicking into place. Exactly. Andrea's eyes gleamed with professional appreciation. But you, Mr. Sullivan, you're our breakthrough. You're awake, you're credible, and thanks to Jack's surveillance, we have your wife's confession. Not enough for court, Jack warned. They'll claim you were confused, traumatized. Grace will say she was just playing along because she thought you were having a mental break. We need more. Thomas thought of his children's strange behavior, of Catherine's nervous glances, of his brother-in-law James Porter's convenient position as hospital administrator. The conspiracy goes deeper than just Grace and Richard, doesn't it? Andrea nodded grimly. Your sister Catherine has been handling the foundation's books. Your brother-in-law James signs off on Berkeley's paperwork. It's a tight network, all protecting each other. But networks have weak points, Jack added, pulling up another file. People talk, make mistakes, get scared when they realize what they're really involved in. Thomas stared at the growing web of evidence on their tablets, his training as an engineer helping him see the structural weaknesses in their conspiracy. We need to map everyone involved. Their connections, their vulnerabilities. Already started, Andrea said, revealing a complex diagram of relationships and transactions. But we need someone on the inside. Someone they think they've beaten. Jack's expression was grim. They think you're broken, confused, possibly traumatized by the coma. We can use that. Play the victim, Andrea suggested, her tactical mind already working through scenarios. Let them think they're still in control while we gather evidence. Thomas thought of Grace's triumphant sneer, of Richard's smug confidence, of his children caught in their web of lies. I can do that, but I want to know everything. Every person involved, every dollar moved, every patient they've hurt. It won't be easy, Jack warned. These people are your family, your friends. What we find might be worse than what you already know. They stopped being family the moment they put me in that coma, Thomas replied, his voice hard. When do we start? Andrea checked her watch. Berkeley has a board meeting at noon. I have a source inside who's willing to talk, a nurse who's been documenting irregularities in patient care. Patty Reynolds, Thomas guessed, remembering the nurse's cryptic warnings. Jack nodded. She's been our eyes inside the hospital. Took a big risk slipping you that hint about Richard. Thomas straightened in his seat, military training kicking in as they moved into operational planning. All right, let's build this case, piece by piece, until there's nowhere left for them to hide. The waitress appeared with fresh coffee, puzzled by the intensity around the booth, but professional enough not to comment. As she walked away, Thomas looked at his new allies, the hardened intelligence officer turned security consultant and the determined detective who'd been fighting this battle before he even knew it existed. Your case could break this wide open, Andrea said, echoing her earlier assessment. But we need concrete evidence, documentation, witnesses, money trails. Everything has to be bulletproof. They'll be watching you, Jack added. Grace, Richard, everyone involved. One wrong move and they'll know we're coming. Thomas thought of his children, of other families torn apart by Berkeley's schemes, of the patient who didn't survive. Then we don't make any wrong moves. We do this right, we do it thoroughly, and we make sure they never hurt anyone else again. As the morning crowd began to thin, the 3 conspirators bent over their tablets, building their own web of justice to counter the web of deceit that had nearly destroyed Thomas's life. Outside, the sun climbed higher, point toward the hospital where Berkeley's network still operated, unaware that their carefully constructed scheme was about to begin unraveling. Detective Andrea Reeves had seen her share of complicated cases, but as she stood in her cramped office at the fraud division, staring at the evidence board, she knew this one was different. Red strings connected photos, documents, and testimonies, creating a web that grew more complex by the day. Her phone buzzed, a text from Thomas Sullivan. "Catherine's acting strange. Just left the house in a hurry after a call." Andrea checked the surveillance feed Jack had set up. Thomas's sister Catherine was indeed leaving, her normally perfectly maintained appearance slightly disheveled, clutching her designer bag like a shield. The detective's instincts tingled. This was the crack in the facade they'd been waiting for. "Follow her," Andrea texted back. "Standard distance. Jack's team is on backup." Through her earpiece, she heard Jack Winters coordinating his surveillance team. Target heading north on Pine Grove, approaching the hospital. Sullivan maintaining discreet follow. The investigation had revealed an unsettling truth. Thomas's own sister Catherine had been deeply involved in the conspiracy. As the Foundation's accountant, she had helped launder the insurance payments through various charitable programs. Her husband, James Porter, used his position as hospital administrator to ensure Berkeley's activities remained hidden from regulatory oversight. Andrea's desk phone rang, the secure line. "Detective Reeves." "Andrea, it's Patty." Nurse Reynolds's voice was hushed, urgent. "Catherine Porter just arrived. She's with Dr. Berkeley in his office. Something's got them spooked." "Stay on it, Patty." "Any sign of James Porter?" "Not yet, but—" Patty paused. "You need to know something else. The little girl, Madeline? She's been recording things on her phone. I've seen her doing it during family visits, when her mother's not watching." Andrea straightened in her chair. "Does anyone else know?" "I don't think so. She's clever about it, pretends to be playing games. But I've seen her face when she's listening to Grace and Richard talk. That child knows something's wrong." A soft knock at Andrea's door made her look up. Jack Winters stood there, tablet in hand. He'd aged a decade in the weeks since they'd started building this case, the weight of betrayal by his former Marine brother evident in the new lines around his eyes. "Got something," he said, closing the door behind him. "Berkeley's been accessing restricted medical files. Not just Thomas's, but all his special cases, downloading them to an external drive." "Getting ready to run," Andrea muttered. "What about the Porter angle?" "James has been making calls to Canada, looking into property purchases through shell companies." Jack's expression was grim. "They're unraveling, Andrea. Question is, who breaks first?" The answer came sooner than expected. Andrea's cell phone buzzed with another text from Thomas. "Madeline wants to talk. Says she has recordings." Jack and Andrea exchanged looks. Involving a 12-year-old girl in an investigation this dangerous wasn't ideal, but if Madeline had evidence, bring her in, Andrea decided. Carefully. No one can know. An hour later, Madeline Sullivan sat in Andrea's office, her phone clutched in trembling hands. The girl's resemblance to her father was striking. Same determined set of the jaw, same analytical look in her eyes as she surveyed the evidence board. "I started recording after Dad woke up," Madeline explained, her voice small but steady. "Mom and Richard, they said things that didn't make sense. About Dad's accident, about the hospital bills, about Dr. Berkeley's special treatment." She pulled up an audio file on her phone. Grace's voice filled the office. "Berkeley's getting nervous. James says the board's asking questions about the Foundation's finances. We need to accelerate the timeline." Richard's voice responded. "The insurance payment cleared. Once it's through Catherine's laundering system." Another recording. Catherine arguing with James in whispered tones. "They'll trace it back to us. The Foundation's books won't hold up to a real audit." "I knew it was wrong, Dad," Madeline said, looking at Thomas who sat quietly in the corner. Tears welled in her eyes. "But Mom said you'd never wake up anyway. She said Richard was our father now, that we had to accept it. But I couldn't. I couldn't just." Thomas crossed the room in 2 strides, enveloping his daughter in a protective embrace. "You did the right thing," Sweetheart, you're so brave. Andrea watched the reunion with a mix of professional satisfaction and personal empathy. Madeline, these recordings could be very important evidence. Would you be willing to make a formal statement? The girl straightened in her chair, wiping her eyes. I want to tell everything. About the hospital parties they had while Dad was in the coma. About Richard moving his things into our house before Dad even woke up. About Aunt Catherine crying in her car after meetings with Dr. Berkeley. Jack was already pulling up documentation on his tablet. The timestamps on these recordings match our surveillance logs. This corroborates everything we've been building. There's more, Madeline added. Mom doesn't know, but I followed her one day to the hospital basement. She met with Dr. Berkeley and some other doctors. They were talking about other patients, other families they could do this to. The implications hit Andrea like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Thomas Sullivan anymore. Berkeley and his conspirators were actively planning to expand their operation. A commotion in the outer office interrupted them. Patty Reynolds burst in, her nurse's uniform slightly askew. They know, she gasped. Berkeley was just on the phone with Grace. Someone tipped them off about the investigation. They're destroying evidence right now. Jack was already moving, phone to his ear as he coordinated his team. Andrea grabbed her badge and gun, years of training kicking in as she shifted into tactical mode. Thomas, stay with Madeline, she ordered. No one comes in this room without my direct authorization. She tossed him a spare radio. Channel 3 if you need immediate backup. As she and Jack rushed toward the hospital, Andrea's mind raced through contingencies. The network was unraveling faster than expected, threads snapping under the weight of fear and betrayal. The question now wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about containing the damage before the conspirators could cover their tracks completely. What none of them knew was that another player was about to enter the game, one who would change everything. But that would come later. For now, the race was on to prevent Berkeley and his allies from destroying the proof of their crimes, while keeping Thomas and Madeline safe from whatever desperate measures Grace and Richard might take to protect their scheme. Dr. Olivia Martinez made her way to the records department. Her white coat felt like armor now, her stethoscope a prop in an elaborate performance. Every step was measured, casual, just another doctor doing her rounds. Target approaching checkpoint 1, she murmured into her hidden microphone. Through her earpiece, she heard Detective Reeves's acknowledgement. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Thomas would play the confused patient, struggling with memory issues, exactly what Grace and her conspirators wanted to believe. Meanwhile, the team would set their trap. In her office, Andrea Reeves watched multiple surveillance feeds on her laptop. Jack's team had worked through the night, planting cameras and microphones throughout the hospital's key areas. Dr. Berkeley's office, the Foundation's meeting room, even the supposedly secure record storage, all now under constant surveillance. Everyone in position, Jack's voice came through the secure channel. Thomas is approaching the main entrance with Grace. On one screen, Andrea watched Thomas Sullivan enter the hospital, leaning slightly on a cane he didn't really need. Grace walked beside him, her designer outfit and perfect makeup a stark contrast to her husband's deliberately disheveled appearance. I just don't understand why we need another consultation, Grace was saying, her voice honey-sweet with concern. Dr. Berkeley already cleared you. I keep having these gaps, Thomas replied, his voice uncertain. Times when things don't make sense. Dr. Martinez thinks we should run some more tests. Grace's hand tightened on his arm. To any observer, a supportive wife helping her recovering husband. But the cameras caught her expression, the flash of calculation in her eyes. In the records department, Olivia accessed the hospital's database. Initiating data transfer, she murmured. Berkeley's files are being copied to our secure server. Ma'am, you can't be in here. A stern voice interrupted. James Porter stood in the doorway, his hospital administrator badge gleaming. Olivia turned, projecting professional confidence. Mr. Porter, Dr. Berkeley requested these files for the board meeting. Something about insurance audits? She watched James's face pale slightly. I'll handle those myself, he said quickly. Protocol, you understand? Of course. Olivia gathered her papers, apparently surrendering the field. What James didn't know was that her brief access had been enough. Jack's software was already deep in the hospital systems, extracting every hidden file, every altered record. Meanwhile, Thomas had reached Berkeley's office suite. His cane caught on the carpet, sending him stumbling. Grace rushed to help, not noticing how the movement brought Thomas close to Berkeley's computer. Thumb drive in place, Thomas subvocalized into his hidden mic. The tiny device, disguised as a medical alert button on his jacket, would clone Berkeley's hard drive within minutes. Mr. Sullivan, Dr. Berkeley emerged from his office, all professional concern. Grace didn't mention you were coming in today. He's been confused, Grace interjected quickly. Having trouble remembering things. Berkeley's eyes narrowed slightly. Perhaps we should run some tests. Make sure there are no lingering effects from your treatment. The way he said treatment made Thomas's skin crawl, but he maintained his confused facade. That would be good? Everything's so fuzzy sometimes. Through his earpiece, he heard Andrea's voice. Nurse Reynolds reports Catherine just arrived at the Foundation office. She's accessing the financial records. The trap was closing. Each conspirator, thinking they were covering their tracks, was actually leading investigators right to the evidence. Jack's surveillance equipment recorded every nervous conversation, every rushed attempt to hide incriminating documents. Dr. Martinez suggested some cognitive tests, Thomas said, watching Berkeley's reaction carefully. Did she? Berkeley's tone was sharp. I don't recall authorizing that. I did. Olivia appeared in the doorway, her timing perfect. As Mr. Sullivan's current physician of record, the tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Grace's hand found Thomas's arm again, her manicured nails digging in slightly. That won't be necessary, Grace said smoothly. We trust Dr. Berkeley completely, don't we, Thomas? Before Thomas could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the hospital. Fire alarms, Jack's diversion. We need to evacuate, Olivia announced, taking charge as hospital staff began implementing emergency protocols. In the confusion, no one noticed Jack's team slipping into key offices, securing computers and files. No one saw Andrea's officers taking up strategic positions. And no one paid attention to Madeline Sullivan, sitting quietly in the hospital cafe with her phone recording every panicked conversation between her mother and Richard as they rushed to respond to the emergency. All evidence secured, Jack reported through the command channel. Financial records, medical files, everything. Phone logs show they're all calling each other, Andrea added. Every conspiracy member is reaching out to their co-conspirators, creating more evidence with every call. In Berkeley's office, Thomas watched the doctor's practiced calm crumble as he realized his computer was locked in security mode. What's happening? Berkeley demanded. System lockdown, Olivia explained calmly. Standard procedure during evacuations. All files are automatically backed up to secure storage. Grace's face went pale as she checked her phone. Multiple missed calls from Catherine, from James, from Richard. The network was unraveling in real time. I need to check on the Foundation office, she said quickly. Thomas, wait here with Dr. Berkeley. Actually, Thomas said, dropping his confused act as he removed his jacket with its hidden recording device. I think we all need to stay right here. Berkeley lunged for his office phone, but the line was dead. Grace backed toward the door only to find Jack Winters standing there, his expression grim. Going somewhere? He asked. Through his earpiece, Thomas heard Andrea coordinating with her teams. Catherine was in custody, caught trying to delete Foundation records. James Porter had been intercepted trying to leave through the emergency exit. Richard had walked right into a trap in the parking garage. What have you done? Grace whispered, staring at Thomas with a mixture of fury and fear. The same thing you did to me, Thomas replied calmly. I planned carefully, gathered my allies, and waited for the right moment. The only difference is, I'm doing it to expose the truth, not bury it. Dr. Martinez moved to stand beside him, her professional demeanor now underlaid with steel. The medical board is very interested in Dr. Berkeley's experimental treatments, she said, particularly the ones that aren't in any official records. You can't prove anything, Berkeley blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, Jack said, holding up his tablet, we can prove everything. Every file, every conversation, every dollar transferred. Your entire conspiracy, documented in detail. It's over, Thomas said quietly, watching his wife's perfect mask crack. All of it. The fire alarms still blared, but now they sounded less like a diversion and more like a death knell for Berkeley's network. In the controlled chaos of the evacuation, Andrea's team was systematically containing every member of the conspiracy. Through the office window, Thomas could see hospital staff and patients gathered in the parking lot. Somewhere out there, Madeline was safe with Andrea's most trusted officers, her phone full of recordings that would help seal the conspirators' fate. His daughter had been braver than anyone knew, gathering evidence even as she struggled with her own family's betrayal. Grace sank into a chair, her designer outfit suddenly seeming like a costume that no longer fit. "You weren't supposed to wake up," she said, almost to herself. "None of this was supposed to happen." "No," Thomas agreed. "I was supposed to stay in that coma while you and Richard spent my insurance money. I was supposed to be a convenient victim for Berkeley's experiments. I was supposed to never know how deep the betrayal went." Jack's phone buzzed. "Andrea says they've secured everyone," he reported. "Catherine's talking already, trying to make a deal." Berkeley's professional facade crumbled entirely. "You don't understand," he pleaded. "The research potential, the medical advances." "Your research days are over," Jack said grimly. Thomas watched the realization settle over Grace's face as her carefully constructed world began to crumble. The fire alarms continued their urgent warning, matching the chaos unfolding throughout the hospital as Andrea's team moved to secure evidence and contain the conspirators. Grace's phone buzzed again. Another desperate call from Richard, no doubt. But it was too late for warnings, too late for damage control. The trap had sprung, and now all that remained was to see how many of them would be caught in its jaws. "What happens now?" Grace asked, her voice barely audible over the alarms. Thomas met her eyes steadily. "Now? Now we find out exactly how deep this conspiracy goes." Memorial General Hospital's annual charity gala transformed the usually sterile main atrium into an elegant evening venue. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white linen, while strings of twinkling lights created a false ceiling that almost hid the institutional framework above. The city's elite mingled over champagne and canapes, their evening were a stark contrast to the hospital's usual scrubs and lab coats. Detective Andrea Reeves adjusted her earpiece discreetly, her dark evening gown concealing both her weapon and her badge. From her position near the bar, she had a clear view of the makeshift stage where the evening's awards would be presented. "All exits covered," Jack's voice came through her earpiece. "Team 1 in position at the north entrance, Team 2 at the service corridors. No one leaves without us knowing." Andrea's eyes tracked Grace Sullivan as she worked the room, resplendent in a designer gown that probably cost more than most hospital staff made in a month. Richard Hawthorne stayed close to her side, playing the devoted family friend to perfection. They were scheduled to receive the hospital's humanitarian award for their dedicated support of coma patients, irony that made Andrea's stomach turn. "How's our technical setup?" she murmured into her concealed mic. "Everything's ready," came the response from the control room they'd established in an unused administrative office. All footage queued and synchronized. Audio levels checked. "We can take over the main display system on your signal." Dr. Olivia Martinez appeared at Andrea's elbow, elegant in a simple blue dress that didn't impede her ability to move quickly if needed. "Berkeley just arrived," she reported quietly. "He's with the board members near the podium." Andrea nodded. Dr. Berkeley looked nervous, his bow tie slightly askew as he glanced repeatedly toward the exits. He knew something was wrong but couldn't piece it together yet. James Porter was notably absent. Their surveillance had caught him making hurried travel arrangements earlier in the day. "Thomas is ready," Jack reported. "Waiting for the cue." Andrea watched Grace ascend the stage steps, Richard close behind. The hospital's chief of surgery approached the podium for the introduction. The moment was almost here. "Good evening, distinguished guests," the chief began. "Tonight, we honor two individuals who have shown extraordinary dedication to our hospital community. Through their foundation's work, Grace Sullivan and Richard Hawthorne have supported countless families dealing with the trauma of long-term coma care." Grace stepped forward, her practiced smile radiant under the lights. Richard stood beside her, one hand resting possessively on her waist. Neither noticed Thomas Sullivan emerging from the shadows at the back of the atrium. Their personal experience with Mrs. Sullivan's husband's condition has inspired them to help others in similar situations, the chief continued. Their generous donations have funded new equipment, family support programs. Interesting choice of words. Thomas's voice cut through the room, amplified by the microphone Jack's team had patched into the sound system. Personal experience. Grace froze on stage, her smile cracking for just a moment before she recovered. Thomas, we didn't know you were feeling up to attending tonight. Thomas moved through the crowd, which parted before him like water. He walked with purpose now, no sign of the confused patient he'd been pretending to be. I wouldn't miss it, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the speakers. After all, I'm the reason for your humanitarian work, aren't I? Richard stepped forward, trying to take control of the situation. Tom, buddy, you should be resting. The doctors said these events might be too stimulating. The doctors. Thomas reached the stage. Let's talk about the doctors, Richard. Specifically, let's talk about Dr. Berkeley's experimental treatments. Berkeley, who had been trying to slip away, found his path blocked by two of Jack's security team. The crowd's polite murmur had died away, replaced by a tense silence. I don't know what you're talking about, Grace said, but her voice shook slightly. Thomas has been confused since he woke up, as many of you know. Play it, Thomas commanded. The giant screen behind the stage, meant for a celebratory slideshow, flickered to life. Grace's own voice filled the atrium. It was us. Richard and I needed you out of the way. The color drained from Grace's face as she watched herself confess in their kitchen. More footage followed. Surveillance videos of meetings with Berkeley, recorded phone calls discussing insurance payments, bank records showing the money trail through the foundation. But wait, Thomas said, his voice cutting through the shocked whispers of the crowd. There's more. Madeline? Their 12-year-old daughter stood up from her seat near the front, phone in hand. Her voice, clear and strong, carried through the speakers. Play the recording from October 12th. More audio filled the room. Grace and Richard planning with Berkeley, discussing dosages and timing. Catherine's voice arguing about foundation accounts. James Porter arranging for falsified medical records. Stop, Grace whispered. But Thomas wasn't finished. Medical records showing intentionally induced comas, he continued, as documents flashed across the screen. Insurance fraud documentation. Foundation records showing how the money was laundered. And statements from other families. 6 other victims of your humanitarian work. Richard lunged for Thomas, but Jack materialized from the crowd, intercepting him with military precision. Andrea was already moving, her badge now visible as she took the stage. Grace Sullivan, Richard Hawthorne, Dr. Alan Berkeley, she announced, her voice carrying the full weight of her authority. You are under arrest for conspiracy, insurance fraud, medical malpractice, and attempted murder. Grace looked wildly around the room, seeking allies, but found only shocked faces and accusing stares. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling on the very stage where she'd expected to receive accolades. You don't understand, she tried, her voice shrill. We were helping people. The foundation's work was funded by insurance money stolen from innocent victims, Thomas finished. Money you got by keeping me in a medically induced coma. By planning to do the same to others. Berkeley broke first, trying to run, but Jack's team had every exit covered. Catherine, who had been sitting in stunned silence, began to sob. Through the crowd, Thomas could see Nurse Patty Reynolds filming everything on her phone, ensuring even this final confrontation would be documented. As Andrea began reading them their rights, Grace's sophisticated mask finally shattered completely. It was perfect, she screamed, her voice echoing off the atrium's high ceiling. We had everything planned. The foundation, the insurance, all of it. You were never supposed to wake up. The crowd recoiled from her fury, from the madness in her eyes as she had to be physically restrained. Richard stood in stunned silence as he was handcuffed, his decorated Marine bearing deserting him as he faced the consequences of his betrayal. Thomas watched it all from the podium, his expression calm. Behind him, the evidence continued to play across the screen. a digital testament to the depth of their conspiracy and the thoroughness of its unraveling. Dr. Martinez had moved to stand beside him, her quiet presence a reminder of the honest medical professionals who had helped expose the truth. The charity gala dissolved into chaos as police officers arrived to secure the scene. The city's elite who had come to celebrate humanitarian work now found themselves potential witnesses in what would become one of the biggest medical fraud cases in the state's history. Madeline made her way through the crowd to her father's side, her young face showing a mixture of relief and sadness. "Is it really over, Dad?" Thomas put his arm around her shoulders, watching as Grace, Richard, and Berkeley were led away. "This part is, sweetheart. This part is." The courthouse corridors echoed with footsteps and whispered conversations as the most significant medical fraud case in the state's history unfolded. Detective Andrea Reeves stood by the prosecution's table, watching as Dr. Alan Berkeley took the stand. The once confident neurologist had aged years in the weeks since his arrest, his medical license already suspended, pending the trial's outcome. "Dr. Berkeley," the prosecutor began, "please explain to the court how you selected your victims." Berkeley's eyes darted around the courtroom, landing briefly on Thomas Sullivan in the front row before skittering away. "They weren't victims," he insisted, his voice barely carrying to the jury. "They were research subjects. The induced comas allowed us to study long-term neural responses." "And the insurance payments?" the prosecutor pressed. "Where did those fit into your research?" The doctor's composure cracked. "It was expensive work. The foundation, Mrs. Sullivan's foundation, provided funding through the insurance settlements. Everything was documented. Everything was fraud," the prosecutor finished, holding up a stack of papers. "These are your own records, Dr. Berkeley. Notes on how to induce comas without leaving evidence. Correspondence with James Porter about falsifying hospital records. Calculations of insurance payouts. James Porter. They'd caught him at the Canadian border, his hastily packed bags still in his car. Now he sat in the defendant's section, refusing to look at his wife Catherine, who had turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency. The research had potential, Berkeley protested weakly. "If we had more time, more subjects, more victims," Thomas interjected from his seat, loud enough for the jury to hear. The trial had been proceeding for days. Catherine had broken down on the stand, confessing everything about the foundation's role in laundering insurance money. Her testimony had been devastating, revealing how Grace had orchestrated the entire scheme. "Grace approached me," she had sobbed. "Said Thomas was working too hard, that he needed a rest. I thought she meant a vacation. But then she introduced me to Dr. Berkeley, explained about the insurance policies." Richard Hawthorne had maintained his military bearing through most of the proceedings, until Jack Winters took the stand. The security consultant laid out decades of military intelligence training, explaining how Richard's own habitual record-keeping had documented the conspiracy. "As Marines, we were trained to log everything," Jack testified, presenting Richard's personal files. Dates, times, participants in every meeting. Richard kept detailed records of every conversation with Grace, every payment arrangement with Berkeley, every step of their plan to keep Thomas in a coma while they built their new life together. Richard's facade had finally cracked at that revelation. His own meticulousness, the very trait that had made him an excellent Marine, had helped destroy him. Detective Reeves watched Grace throughout the proceedings. The woman's designer outfits had been replaced by conservative courtroom attire, but she still tried to maintain her sophisticated image. That image shattered completely during cross-examination. "Mrs. Sullivan," the prosecutor asked, "how long had you been planning to have your husband placed in a medically induced coma?" "Objection," Grace's lawyer called out, but she was already answering. "He didn't appreciate anything." Grace's voice rose hysterically. "All his work, his precious integrity." Richard understood. Richard knew how to enjoy life, how to use our position in society. The foundation was going to make us legitimate, respected. Those other families, they should have been grateful. Their insurance money was funding important work. Important work? The prosecutor pressed. Like the experimental treatments that killed Michael Chun? The courtroom fell silent. Michael Chun had been Berkeley's first victim, The complications in his case, a direct result of the untested coma-inducing procedures. His widow sat in the gallery, clutching a framed photograph. "That wasn't supposed to happen," Grace whispered, her mask cracking further. "None of this was supposed to happen. We had it all planned perfectly." Her voice rose to a shriek as she gestured wildly at Thomas. "Those brats were supposed to be mine. Everything was supposed to be mine." Court officers had to restrain her as she tried to lunge across the room. "You ruined everything," she screamed as they led her away. "It was perfect. It was all perfect." The jury took less than 4 hours to reach their verdicts. Dr. Berkeley's medical license was permanently revoked, his sentence ensuring he would never practice again. James Porter's attempted flight to Canada earned him additional charges. Catherine's cooperation bought her a lighter sentence, but the look in her brother's eyes as she was led away suggested some things could never be forgiven. Richard's military background worked against him, the betrayal of his fellow Marine adding weight to his sentence. His final statement was directed at Thomas. "You had everything and you didn't even know it." Grace's breakdown became legendary in legal circles. Even as she was sentenced, she maintained that she had been helping people, that her charitable foundation had done good work. The judge's response was scathing. "You preyed on families at their most vulnerable," he declared. "You twisted medicine and charity into tools for personal gain. Your foundation didn't help people. It helped you steal their money and their lives." As the verdicts were read, Thomas sat between Madeline and Ryan, an arm around each child. Their testimony about life in the house during his coma, about Grace and Richard's growing relationship, about the gradual replacement of their father with his supposed best friend, had helped seal the conspirators' fate. "Did Mom ever love us?" Ryan asked quietly as they watched her being led away. Thomas pulled his son closer. "She loved the idea of a perfect family," he answered honestly. "But real love isn't about perfection. It's about truth." 1 year later, the suburban backyard of 423 Pine Grove Drive had transformed, much like the family that called it home. The once manicured formal gardens had given way to a more natural landscape, with wildflowers and climbing vines adding color and life. A golden retriever puppy named Scout bounded through the grass, chasing a tennis ball thrown by Ryan and Madeline. Thomas Sullivan sat on the patio, watching his children play. The past year had been a journey of healing, of rebuilding trust and redefining family. Weekly counseling sessions had helped the children understand that their mother's actions weren't their fault, that love shouldn't come with conditions or conspiracies. Dr. Olivia Martinez, just Olivia now, sat beside him, their fingers naturally intertwining. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on a foundation of honesty and shared experiences. She had been there through the trials, through the children's nightmares, through the long process of recovery. Ryan's science project won first place, Thomas said, watching his son demonstrate a perfect throw for Scout. His teacher said his presentation on medical ethics was surprisingly mature. Olivia smiled, understanding the complexity behind that simple statement. They're resilient kids, and they have a father who shows them what real strength looks like. The sound of a car in the driveway announced Andrea's arrival. The detective had become more than just a colleague during the investigation. She was family now, her straight-shooting personality helping the children process their trauma with honesty and humor. "Uncle Jack's here," Madeline called out as a second car pulled up. Jack Winters emerged from his vehicle carrying pizza boxes, his security consultant demeanor softening as Scout rushed to greet him. The bond between the two former Marines had grown stronger through adversity, forging a brotherhood more genuine than anything Thomas had shared with Richard. Their new security consulting firm, specializing in medical fraud prevention, had already helped several hospitals identify and prevent similar schemes. They had turned tragedy into purpose, using their experience to protect other families from the nightmare they had lived through. "I got the certification results," Jack announced as they settled around the patio table. 3 more hospitals have implemented our screening protocols. The medical board is considering making them standard practice." Thomas watched Madeline showing Andrea her latest art project. No more dark lines separating family members, no more shadowy figures in the background. Her therapy art had evolved along with her healing, the colors brighter, the family circle complete even if differently shaped than before. "Dad," Madeline called, running over with Scout at her heels. Can we have pizza now? Scout's hungry too. Thomas smiled, embracing his daughter. The scars would always be there. In the empty spaces where Grace's photos once hung, in the quiet moments when the children remembered their mother's betrayal, in the trust issues they all still worked through. But those scars had healed into something stronger, marking survival rather than defeat. The family gathered around the table, joined by the people who had helped them rebuild. Olivia with her quiet strength, Andrea with her unwavering integrity, Jack with his loyal friendship. They had created something new from the ashes of betrayal, a family bound by choice and truth rather than obligation and deception. As the sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, Thomas looked around at his rebuilt life. The children were laughing at Scout's attempts to steal pepperoni, their therapy sessions having helped them understand that their mother's actions reflected her choices, not their worth. Olivia's hand found his under the table, their relationship built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. You know, Andrea said, helping Ryan toss scraps to Scout, sometimes the strongest families are the ones we choose. Thomas nodded, understanding the truth in those words. His family hadn't been destroyed. It had been reconstructed, stronger and truer than before. The scars would remain, but they had healed into something beautiful, a testament to resilience and the power of genuine love. The evening wound down with easy conversation and shared laughter, the darkness of the past giving way to the promise of the future. This was his legacy now. Not the perfect facade his wife had tried to maintain, but the authentic connections forged through adversity and strengthened by truth. Dad, Madeline said as they cleared the table, her voice carrying the innocent wisdom of youth, I'm glad we're us now. The real us. Thomas hugged his daughter, feeling the simple truth in her words. They were the real them now, scarred but stronger, broken but beautifully rebuilt. And in that truth lay their greatest healing. Epilogue. 5 years later. The modern office suite overlooking downtown bore little resemblance to the sterile hospital corridors where the story had begun. Sullivan and Winter's Security Consulting had grown from a two-person operation into one of the most respected medical fraud prevention firms in the country. Their case files lined the walls, each one representing a family saved from the kind of nightmare that had nearly destroyed Thomas Sullivan's life. Thomas stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city buzz below. At 47, the silver threading through his temples added gravitas to his appearance, matching the quiet confidence he'd developed in the years since the trial. On his desk, a framed photograph showed his family. Not the perfect facade Grace had cultivated, but the real, beautiful truth they'd built from the ashes of betrayal. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Sullivan? Detective Reeves is here for your meeting. Andrea Reeves, now Captain Reeves of the Special Frauds Division, entered the office, carrying a familiar file. You heard the news? She asked without preamble. Grace's latest appeal was denied. Thomas nodded. Jack sent me the notification this morning. 5 years into her 20-year sentence, Grace Sullivan Matthews, she'd reverted to her maiden name, had exhausted her last legal option. Her life in the women's correctional facility was a far cry from the sophisticated society circles she'd once ruled. According to the reports, she still maintained her innocence to anyone who would listen, though her audience had dwindled to a handful of equally desperate inmates. Richard's not doing much better, Andrea added, settling into a chair. The military prison takes a special kind of toll on someone who betrayed the Corps. Richard Hawthorne had received 18 years for his role in the conspiracy. His fellow inmates, many of them former service members, had their own opinion of a Marine who would betray his brother-in-arms. The last photo Thomas had seen showed a broken man, his military bearing long forgotten. Dr. Berkeley? Thomas asked, though he already knew. Still serving his 15 years. The medical board used his case to rewrite their oversight protocols. Your security firm's recommendations are now standard practice in hospitals across 3 states. Thomas smiled slightly. Their work had helped implement sophisticated fraud detection systems, staff screening protocols, and patient protection measures. Berkeley's scheme would be nearly impossible to replicate now. How's the family? Andrea asked, her tone softening. She remained a close friend, having watched the Sullivan children grow and heal over the years. Thomas picked up a more recent photo from his desk. Ryan, now 19, stood proud in his college sweatshirt. He was studying medical ethics, determined to prevent others from abusing the system that had nearly killed his father. 17-year-old Madeline's artistic talent had blossomed. Her paintings about family, truth, and healing had won several youth art competitions. Ryan's interning at the hospital ethics board this summer, Thomas said proudly. And Madeline just got accepted to art school. She's thinking about art therapy as a career. The mention of the hospital brought other updates to mind. The institution had undergone a complete administrative overhaul after the scandal. James Porter had served 3 years for his role in the conspiracy and now worked as a night manager at a small-town motel. His medical administration career permanently ended. Catherine, after serving 18 months, had moved across the country. Her attempts at reconciliation met with polite but firm distance from her brother. A new photo frame held pride of place on Thomas's desk, his wedding photo with Olivia from 2 years ago. The ceremony had been intimate, attended by those who had helped them rebuild. Andrea and her family, Jack and his team, Nurse Patty Reynolds, now the hospital's head of patient advocacy, and a few close friends who had stood by them through everything. The door opened and Jack Winters entered, his security consultant demeanor still sharp despite the years. "Just got word from my contact at the correctional facility," he reported. "Grace isn't taking the appeal denial well. Had to be moved to suicide watch." Thomas absorbed this information without visible reaction. His feelings about Grace had evolved from anger to something more complex, a sad understanding of someone who had destroyed herself through greed and deception. "The foundation money?" he asked. "All recovered and redistributed," Andrea confirmed. "The Victims' Compensation Fund has helped 6 families rebuild their lives. Michael Chin's widow used her settlement to start a patient advocacy group. The sound of nails clicking on hardwood flooring announced Scout's arrival. The therapy dog, now a distinguished senior canine, had become the office mascot, helping nervous clients feel at ease as they reported suspected fraud cases." He settled at Thomas's feet with a contented sigh. The intercom buzzed again. "Dr. Martinez Sullivan is on line 1. Thomas smiled at the name as he picked up the phone. Olivia's voice carried warmth even through the telephone line. "Just checking if we're still on for Ryan's celebration dinner tonight?" "Wouldn't miss it," he assured her. "Andrea's here. Should we add 2 more to the reservation?" The evening found them at their favorite restaurant, the private room filled with the kind of genuine warmth that Grace's carefully orchestrated society events had never achieved. Ryan proudly showed off his hospital ID badge, while Madeline shared sketches from her upcoming exhibition. Scout dozed under the table, occasionally accepting treats from his extended family. "Got a new case today," Jack mentioned between courses. Hospital board member noticed some irregularities in their long-term care billing. "Already flagged it for investigation," Andrea added. "This time, we catch it before anyone gets hurt." Thomas listened to them discuss the case, marveling at how their shared trauma had forged such strong bonds. Olivia's hand found his under the table, their wedding rings clicking softly together. Their relationship had grown from the seeds of tragedy into something beautiful, built on unwavering honesty and mutual respect. Later that night, back home in the house that no longer held any traces of Grace's artificial perfection, Thomas sat in his study reviewing case files. A letter had arrived earlier, his quarterly update from the correctional facility's victim liaison office. Grace had finally stopped trying to contact the children. Her carefully crafted letters, full of manipulation and self-justification, had gone unanswered for years. Ryan and Madeline had chosen to remember her as a cautionary tale rather than a mother, understanding that real love didn't require schemes or conspiracies. The victim liaison reported that Richard had attempted to send a letter as well, full of rambling explanations about brotherhood and destiny. Jack had intercepted it, protecting his friend from further attempts at manipulation. Their true brotherhood, forged in the aftermath of betrayal, needed no explanations or justifications. A soft knock at the study door interrupted his thoughts. Madeline stood there, holding one of her latest paintings, a powerful piece showing a family tree with broken branches giving way to new growth. "Dad, I was thinking of donating this to the hospital's therapy wing. Maybe it could help other families heal." Thomas hugged his daughter, seeing in her art the same resilience that had helped them all survive. "I think that's a wonderful idea, sweetheart." Later, As the house settled into night's quiet rhythms, Thomas stood in the backyard gazing at the stars. Scout leaned against his leg, silver muzzle raised to the cool breeze. The garden Olivia had helped plant bloomed with natural beauty, so different from Grace's manicured pretensions. Inside, he could hear Ryan and Madeline's laughter as they helped Olivia with a new patient advocacy program she was developing. The sounds of real family life. Imperfect, honest, and infinitely precious. His phone buzzed with a text from Andrea, new fraud prevention protocol approved by State Medical Board. Your story continues to make a difference. Thomas smiled, understanding the truth of those words. Their story hadn't ended with Grace's conviction or Richard's imprisonment. It hadn't ended with Berkeley's downfall or the hospital's reformation. Their story continued in every life they helped protect, every family they helped save from similar schemes. The scars remained, but they had healed into something meaningful. His children had grown stronger through adversity, their hearts more compassionate for having known betrayal. His marriage to Olivia showed them what real love looked like, built on trust, strengthened by honesty, and enriched by shared purpose. Grace and Richard would serve their sentences, Berkeley would never practice medicine again, and the other conspirators would live with the consequences of their choices. But the true victory wasn't in their punishment. It was in the lives rebuilt, the lessons learned, and the legacy of truth that had emerged from their web of lies. As if reading his thoughts, Scout nuzzled his hand. Thomas scratched the old dog's ears, remembering how this faithful companion had helped his children heal in those first difficult years. Now Scout helped others, bringing comfort to shell-shocked families who came to report suspected fraud. A light touch on his shoulder announced Olivia's presence. Coming to bed? Thomas turned to his wife, seeing in her eyes the same steady strength that had helped him rebuild his life. Just thinking about how far we've come, and how far we'll go, she added, understanding as always. Together they walked back into their home, leaving the ghosts of betrayal behind in the starlit garden. Grace's perfect plan had failed, but from its ashes had risen something far more valuable. A family bound by truth, strengthened by adversity, and dedicated to protecting others from similar fates. The security firm's motto, engraved on the office wall, said it all. Truth prevails, justice heals. They lived those words every day, turning personal tragedy into universal protection, private pain into public good. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.